In a small, fog-drenched village nestled in the shadows of the mountains, lived Vivienne, a violinist of modest skill but boundless ambition. She spent her days practicing with her battered, scratched instrument, dreaming of one day performing in grand concert halls under glittering chandeliers. Yet, no matter how much she practiced, her music lacked the depth and soul she yearned to convey. Her performances were met with polite applause, but she saw no spark in her audience's eyes, no tears, no smiles. Each night, as the candle burned low, she would whisper to herself, "If only I had the power to truly move them." One rainy evening, as Vivienne wandered through the winding marketplace, she stumbled upon a peculiar shop she had never noticed before. Its sign read Vespers Curiosities in curling, golden letters, and its dimly lit windows displayed strange artifacts, twinkling jewels, tarnished silver, and objects that seemed to hum with unseen power. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped inside, and the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and incense. Shelves crammed with oddities loomed over her, casting long, warped shadows. On a pedestal draped in crimson velvet, an ornate violin caught her eye. Its body was the color of dark wine, its surface etched with swirling patterns that seemed to shift when she looked too long. The strings glistened like spider silk, and the bow, resting beside it, shimmered faintly. "Ah, you've found it," came a voice from the shadows. Vivienne turned to see the shopkeeper, an elderly man with piercing silver eyes and a voice like the creak of ancient wood. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "This is no ordinary violin. Its melodies can touch the deepest corners of the soul." But he leaned in, his gaze locking onto hers. "It is not an instrument to be taken lightly. Are you prepared for the responsibility it demands?" "What responsibility?" Vivienne asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The shopkeeper smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Play it wisely, and it will grant you greatness beyond imagination. But be warned, this violin has a voice of its own. Should you falter, it will play you instead." Despite the cryptic warning, Vivienne felt drawn to the violin as if it were calling her name. Without hesitation, she handed over her meager savings and took the instrument home, her heart racing with anticipation. That night, Vivienne lit every candle in her small, cluttered room and drew the bow across the strings of the crimson violin. The first note was unlike anything she had ever produced, rich, haunting, and impossibly beautiful. It resonated in her chest, vibrating with a life of its own. As she played, the music seemed to take on a willpower stronger than hers. Her fingers moved effortlessly, the bow gliding as if guided by unseen hands. The melody was intoxicating, filling the room with sorrow and longing. Her neighbor, hearing the music through the thin walls, began to weep uncontrollably, overcome by memories of a lost love. A passerby outside stopped in their tracks, clutching their chest, as waves of joy and despair washed over them. Vivienne stopped, breathless. She stared at the violin, her hands trembling. "What is this power?" she whispered. The violin seemed to hum in response. In the days that followed, Vivienne's fame grew. Her performances enchanted audiences, leaving them spellbound. Each time she played, her music became more powerful, more otherworldly. But with each performance, Vivienne felt an eerie presence creeping into her thoughts. Her dreams were haunted by a shadowy figure cloaked in black, its face obscured. It whispered to her in a voice as smooth as silk, "Do you feel it, Vivienne? This is what true art feels like. But all great art demands sacrifice." One night, as she practiced alone, the figure stepped out of the shadows in her room. Its form was tall and sinuous, its eyes glowing like embers. "Who are you?" Vivienne demanded, clutching the violin to her chest. "I am Maledictus," it purred, "the soul bound to your violin. For centuries, I have granted artists like you the power to move hearts and minds. But everything comes at a price." "What price?" Maledictus's smile was slow and cruel. "Your freedom, your will. Every note you play binds you further to me. Resist, and I will take everything you hold dear. Play, and the world will remember you forever." Vivienne's performances grew darker, her melodies more haunting. Audiences left her concerts trembling, some moved to tears, others unnerved as if they had glimpsed a world beyond comprehension. But the violin began to exact its toll. Vivienne's reflection showed hollowed eyes, her skin pale and waxy. Her hands, once steady, now trembled when she wasn't playing. Yet she couldn't stop. Each time she tried to put the violin down, her fingers twitched, aching for the strings. Elias, her closest friend and a fellow musician, noticed her decline. After one performance, he confronted her backstage. "Vivienne, this isn't you," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "You look like a ghost. This music, it's destroying you." "I can't stop, Elias," she said, her voice breaking. "I've finally found my voice, my purpose. You don't understand what it's like to be nothing, to be invisible." Elias grabbed her hands. "This thing is poisoning you. Let it go before it takes you completely." But the violin's whispers drowned out Elias's pleas. One fateful night, Vivienne was invited to perform at the grandest venue in the city. The hall was packed with dignitaries, artists, and critics, the air buzzing with anticipation. As Vivienne stepped onto the stage, Maledictus's voice slithered into her mind. "Play for me, Vivienne. Let them all witness the depths of your soul." She drew the bow across the strings, and the music erupted, dark and majestic. The audience was transfixed, their emotions laid bare. Tears streamed down faces, laughter and sobs filled the hall. Some collapsed, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the melody. But as the final note hung in the air, Vivienne felt her last shred of will snap. Her body froze, her fingers still gripping the violin, as Maledictus's voice echoed triumphantly in her mind. "You are mine now, little muse. Forever." The audience erupted into thunderous applause, unaware of the price Vivienne had paid. On the stage, she stood motionless, her eyes vacant, her body now a lifeless puppet controlled by the demon within the violin. Rumors spread of Vivienne's haunting final performance, and some claimed her spirit still lingered in the violin. The crimson instrument vanished from the hall that night, only to reappear years later in a dusty pawnshop, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. And so, the legend of the Crimson Serenade lived on, a cautionary tale of ambition, sacrifice, and the dark cost of greatness.